It's well known that Texas is number one in wind power and has been for a long time. And more recently, Texas became number one in utility scale solar. And we're number two, but gaining on you, California, in utility scale batteries. But one area where Texas severely lags is in distributed generation that's localized close to where it's used. Think of solar panels on rooftops, backup natural gas generators at nursing homes, small wind turbines, small batteries in garages. When I interviewed ERCOT CEO Pablo Vegas for this podcast and asked him about his vision for the grid in 5 years' time, he said, and I'm quoting, "I see a future where there are distributed generation resources scattered throughout every community that we live in. And those resources will be electric vehicles, there'll be HVAC systems in your house connected to a smart thermostat, could be rooftop solar. And I think the grid of the future is going to get down to that premise level where these resources will be acting and participating in grid activities to the benefit of everybody. I think that's where we start to see improved resiliency and potentially improved reliability because of how we can leverage these resources." End quote. Recently, ERCOT staff made a presentation on long-term projections out to 2039, and they envision only 6,000 megawatts of rooftop solar. We already have about 3,000 in Texas. To put that in context, Australia, with less people than Texas, has 20,000 megawatts of rooftop solar. During extreme weather events like heat waves or cold snaps, these localized energy sources can alleviate stress on the grid, benefiting everybody. During Hurricane Beryl, homes equipped with rooftop solar panels and batteries were able to keep the lights and, more importantly, with 100-degree weather, the air conditioning on. These distributed resources also lower costs and help reduce pollution. So what steps do we need to take in Texas to foster growth in this important emerging market? To explore this question, there's no one better than John Berger, founder and CEO of Sunnova Energy. Headquartered in Houston, Sunnova is a leader in residential solar, battery storage, and energy management technologies across the U.S. John has been in the industry for about 30 years now, and he understands the value proposition and the barriers to renewable energy and distributed generation as well as anybody. I really enjoyed talking to John. I always learn a lot talking to him. This episode is available to our paid subscribers with a free preview open to all listeners. To access the full episode, please visit douglewin.com, where you can sign up for a free trial, a monthly subscription, or an annual subscription. Folks, your support as subscribers is vital to the ongoing efforts we're making at the Energy Capital Pod and the Texas Energy and Power newsletter to help people understand the issues at the intersection of reliability, resiliency, affordability, and sustainability. Your support is so important. Also, your word of mouth support. Please tell your friends and colleagues about the Texas Energy Capital podcast. And please do become a subscriber today if you aren't already. And if you are, thank you very much for your continued support. Hope you enjoyed the pod. John Berger, welcome to the Energy Capital podcast.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much for taking some time to talk with me and to talk with this audience. You've got obviously an important company, occupy an important space, doing a lot of great things. Excited to dive into all of it. I think where I want to start, John, is just with, we're recording just a few weeks after Hurricane Beryl. You live, and if I'm not mistaken, unless you moved, you live in Houston, right? Headquartered the company in Houston.
That's correct.
Obviously, this was a traumatic experience for Houston and adds to kind of a series of traumas going all the way back to Ike, but Harvey and obviously Beryl. There are others. You've talked a lot about people wanting to have distributed generation for resilience. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of the value proposition of solar and storage for resilience and just the trends you're seeing in the market? Is this starting to take off? Are you getting more inquiries, more people purchasing systems? Talk a little bit about what's going on out there.
Yeah, I think, first of all, we've been seeing for the last 3, maybe 4 years where utility rates have been moving up, even as inflation jumped up materially. Now it's, of course, way back down to the point where the Federal Reserve is expected to start cutting rates. And frankly, I think should have started cutting them 3 or months ago or so, let alone last week. But when you look at the inflation rate and utility rate increases have been going far faster and far more than any inflation rate. And we expect that to continue. They expect that to continue for several different reasons. One being that they're monopolies and there's no competition. They just can push through the costs, and they're seeing a lot more costs in the system. Part of those costs in the system, and certainly is being hotly debated at this point in time after Hurricane Beryl, are the cost to repair after storms. And Houston is now starting to experience what maybe very select areas of the country experienced over the last few decades, like Florida, which is how do you afford rebuilding the system multiple times over, say, a 20, 30-year period due to storms and damage. We're now experiencing these storms in a regular clip, and the cost or the damage of those storms is going up exponentially, literally. And so when you look at the response, the utility rates are going to get pushed up even further. At the same time, the reliability is dropping, and despite this cost increase, because most of this spending is to repair, not to get better. So people ask all the time, why don't we just bury the lines? Well, okay, who's paying for that? That's a lot of money. And then the second is that even if they did that, is the reliability for a growing number of consumers going to be even good enough for what they have become accustomed to, which is that everything works all the time. When I mean all the time, every second, every minute of the day. And as they're working from their home, for instance, or at least part of the time, where they weren't doing that as little as 4 years ago, they expect that when they're working at home, that they, of course, can work on devices and have the connectivity, and you have to have power to have that connectivity. So all these trends are coming together, along with what I feel like about 18 months or so ago, we finally exited a 21-year bear market in power in this country, and we're now in a bull market that will probably last for 7, 8 years or longer, in my estimation. So we've got this situation where something other than just what we've done in the past 130 years is really needed. And you've got the utility rates moving up, you've got reliability moving down, and what you also have is equipment on the solar, battery, load management, EV charger, all inverter, all moving down as well. So it's really creating that value wedge for consumers where they're getting more reliable power for less money. And so that's really what we see driving our sales and growth. And we see a long-term demand trend that's quite nice.
When you talk about a bull market in power compared to a bear market, are you simply referring to the trends in growth and demand? The demand growth was pretty flat for a long period, and now we're really seeing that curve go up?
Yes, in a word. So a few things that for people to think about that most people don't think about. One, if you go back into the 90s when I started my career in the mid 90s, so I guess that does sound like a long time ago now. We were in a bull market in power. We had consumer choice was sweeping the country, and we really were just reordering the industry. There was no new technology like a cell phone was to telecommunications at that time, or the internet to communications at that time. We were just using the same technology, same fuels, really. And now that's different, by the way. But what we were seeing was economic growth was propelling things forward. But at the same time, we were outsourcing heavy manufacturing, heavy industry that's heavy energy intensive to other countries, specifically China. And so that was decreasing our energy intensity per GDP dollar. And there's countless studies and celebrations of this and so forth. Part of that would then be translated into look at the carbon intensity or the lack thereof or the dropping thereof in the U.S. economy. Aren't we awesome? And then when you had the shale revolution with gas in there, you really kind of turbocharged that decarbonization, if you will. That was true, but what we were really doing is, again, moving energy intensity offshore. The other thing is that after the 90s, you started to get more efficient in computerization. So digitization, there was a focus on energy efficient chips and so forth, and they actually got much more efficient. Furthermore, you had LED technology, which doesn't seem like much, but when you took a 130 watt bulb and made it a 5 watt bulb or a 3 watt bulb, that was a big deal when you added that up. Now, it did take about 20 years, first with CFLs and then with LEDs. But we got there a few years ago. It's hard to find an incandescent bulb at this point in time. That was a huge drop in the power demand. Now, what do we have now? Well, the LED is over, as I just said. We're now spending billions and billions of dollars to bring this heavy industry back, including into the energy space with domestic manufacturing of solar panels and batteries. And we are then loading up the power demand on that front of things with regards to manufacturing. On top of that, we're electrifying transportation, which is a huge load. We can see it in our customers. And when you add all that up, plus then you add into, yes, climate change, it gets hotter. And that's a fact. We've seen some really hot years and trend lines, and they keep breaking more records. People do what? They use more air conditioning, which is extremely energy intensive. So you're adding all this up, plus just regular GDP growth, which has actually not been that bad right over the last few years. What you're now seeing is we're outstripping power supply and with an increasing frequency. In particular, areas and states that have had larger economic growth that have managed to attract more manufacturing or more energy intensive businesses like Texas. And so that if you look at the power demand, I feel like we chewed through the capacity that we had built up in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. And now we need more. And now we're in a bull market, in my opinion, of needing more and more power supply, regardless of fuel type.
Well, and regardless of fuel type, so let's talk about that a little bit. Like, where do you think you're obviously in the business, and you work at a solar company. So, and we'll talk more about that as we go through. It certainly right now, if you look at the data, it looks like, and again, particularly in places like Texas, where you do have competitive generation and investment decisions are being made on a competitive basis as opposed to sort of a central planning basis. Solar and storage are winning in a major way. I think it's true we'll need a diversity of resources, but do you have a sense of like how much of this rising demand can actually come from solar and storage? And I'm also interested, John, in kind of how you see the breakdown between uh, utility scale solar and distributed solar. Texas has been a huge success story on the utility side, but really not as much yet on the distributed generation side. Is that coming? Do we need policy changes to get there?
I think we need policy change. I think we need an overhaul. I think we need something equivalent to the 1996 Telecommunications Act. And then we need to take the Federal Power Act, which is really outdated. And it's embarrassing on the global stage. The United States is by far the laggard in electric policy globally from the Western world plus Japan. All the countries, I might add, including France, have a more competitive capitalistic power market than the United States. And specifically, what we need is competition. So does that look more like Houston and Dallas versus Austin and San Antonio? My answer to that is yes. It can be somewhat varied on that, and that can be something that we look at as far as a country and figure out what overall changes what we need to make. But the bottom line is consumers ought to be able to choose. Once they start to be able to choose how much reliability they're willing to pay for, want to pay for instance, what rates, what kind of things can they get included in their service package, if you will, for their energy supplies. For instance, could they get free charging when they drive from city to city, visiting friends, families, doing business, and so forth. These are the kind of things that you see in innovation in telecommunications over the last 30 years that we just don't have at all in power. Why? Because the regulatory structure is outdated, and it's dependent upon monopolies, and monopolies are going to the politicians, and they're essentially indirectly or directly paying them off and getting what they want, which is to be able to spend more money to make more money for themselves. So there's a chokehold on innovation. There's a chokehold on price discovery. There's a chokehold on cost cuts. There's a chokehold on service improvements. And that needs to be overhauled in a big way and allowed to have the competition. We can have very firm regulatory oversight. And so what I'm actually saying is not to have less of that. You may want more of that. For instance, more expansion of all the technologies, and say that the respective PUC and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission actually has more power to regulate. So I think there is a construct here that we desperately need as a country to catch up with other countries to embrace the technologies to give consumers better energy service at a better price. And then I think you'll see some unleashing of technology and innovation that we haven't seen probably since Edison created the electric business, over 130 years ago.
Thank you for listening to this free preview of the Energy Capital podcast. You can access the entire episode as well as the Texas Energy and Power newsletter archives at douglewin.com. That's DOUGLEWIN.com. You'll also be able to attend paid subscriber-only chats, and you'll receive full access to all of the Texas Grid roundups and reading and podcast picks. Please check it out, and thank you for listening.